Hard Turn is presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.
Life is full of big moments of change and transformation where we have to pivot on our path.
Those moments come with a wide variety of emotions, from fear and anxiety to joy and relief.
I'm Kelly Koopmans.
And I'm Mary Nam.
And this is Hard Turn.
Hi, Kelly.
Hi, how are you, Mary?
I'm doing well.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm taking a deep breath because this episode is deep. But first, if you are joining us for the first time, you're listening to Hard Turn. I'm Mary Nam.
I'm Kelly Koopmans.
And we've had some really great episodes so far, people talking about their personal life experiences, the hard turns, as we call them, how they navigated it. This one has a lot of hard turns.
Okay.
So my guest today, her name is Emma Ta, and she's from Mississippi, lives in Mississippi. She's a mother and wife. She wears many hats, Kel. She's a writer. She's a certified grief coach. She is an inner child healing guide. And by day, she's a nurse anesthetist.
Oh, boy.
I have a hard time saying that word, so
I
feel like we went over the first hurdle. Okay, anesthetist. She's the daughter of Vietnam War refugees who fled to America in the 70s, and they eventually settled down in Mississippi. And that's where she grew up with her two older brothers. Their father worked on a shrimp boat and supported the family. Her older brother died of COVID during the pandemic. And then just a year and a half after that, her other brother died in a workplace accident. He fell off a ladder after inspecting a roof. And so her family, they went through a tremendous amount of sadness, trauma, and grief in a very short amount of time. And then you think about it all happened during the pandemic too, so how stressful that was. After her brothers died, her parents moved in with her and they helped raise her kids. Huge support to, Emma and her husband. They're both working. And it was at that time when one significant hard turn happened. So she's dealing with her grief. The whole family is. And all of a sudden, all of these difficult emotions started to bubble up, Emma says, as she's watching her parents care for her kids in a loving way, feeding them, clothing them, playing with them. And she couldn't understand why these negative feelings were starting to bubble up within her. Before we get into Emma's story any further, I do want to clarify and I want to warn listeners that this episode today deals with generational trauma. Emma talks about physical child abuse. So I want to put that out there in case, you're sensitive to this topic to understand what's coming. But I want to start with these emotions that started coming up, and I'll let Emma describe it in her own words.
So certain things were okay. Like if my kids wanted McDonald's, which was not a thing for us growing up, anytime we drove by McDonald's, my mom's like, no, we have rice at home. And we had a shrimp boat, so, we ate whatever we caught. So it'd be like trash fish that they deep fried, and they make us eat it, and then we choke on a bone, and then we can't go to the doctor. So they make us roll up a rice ball and swallow the rice ball, so we push the bone down. Little things like that was funny. But then, certain things that was not, that was triggering, like seeing that my dad was being more patient with my son versus if certain things that happened to us as a kid, Dad would hit us, slap us across the face. He slapped us so hard with his callous hand that our ears would be ringing. And then seeing him sit there with my son and peeling a purple Asian potato and, and sitting there, playing with him. I'm like, you never, gave this to us. And it kind of triggered the little girl in me who never got those things. And I think, like a little girl, you want things that others have. And even though it's my child, I'm just like, if those baskets were never filled for me, then it's always empty for the rest of my life. And that was why I went to go seek help, to be more knowledgeable in why I felt the way that I felt.
She talks about this in detail, and two things popped into my head, Kelly. When she describes her childhood experiences, she's very clear. She's not overwhelmed with emotion. And I remember when I was interviewing her being kind of awestruck, flabbergasted, confused. Here she is talking about some really painful memories. And she's able to share her story. And she said a lot of that is because of therapy that she went through.
I remember when she specifically mentioned his calloused hand and her ears ringing. That's a very vivid image that you can see, and you can only imagine how impactful it was that she remembers that all these years later. But also within that soundbite, she kind of chuckled on the side of like, eat the rice bowl so it pushes the bone down.
Right.
And it makes my heart break for that little girl. And for the little girl in her now, as she's watching her child get the things that she never got.
Yes. And that it breaks your heart.
Yeah.
And some of what she's describing, there is a large Vietnamese community of shrimp boaters in Mississippi and in the South. And so some of the stories that she's talking about, it's more of what they all went through. Children of that generation, children of the working class poor. These are shared similar experiences. And so when she's talking about that, it's almost like a collective experience of what it was like. But the thing that it just really was so painful to listen to was how watching something so beautiful, this wonderful relationship that her kids have with her parents, her father especially, it suddenly reminded her that that was not the experience she had. And it's not something that you forget or push down so far that it never comes up. It just came up on its own.
And she wasn't expecting it.
No. And so that's what started this work that she started doing, the therapy that she got. It starts with addressing, she says, generational trauma and trying to understand why her father was the way he was. Because Emma says her father never talked about his own childhood. All of it came from her mom. The next clip, she describes her father's childhood, and again, another warning, there is abuse and mention of suicide. But this is what her father lived through, the stories that her mother told her about her dad.
My dad had a lot of childhood trauma. His mother had hung herself during the Vietnam War. So my dad actually found her outside of their little hut, their little dirt hut that they lived in. So that kind of stuck with my dad for the rest of his life. He was raised by his grandparents, his mom's parents, and they beat him a lot. They beat him for everything. I mean, you got to think, it's the Vietnam War. There's a lot of tragedy going on around. They're grieving, and they didn't have the resources to take care of my dad and his two other siblings. And he even tried to go living with his father, but his father had remarried, and then his stepmother beat him. So my father never really had this loving environment. He never had this, someone giving him hugs, kisses, none of that. And when we were growing up, if we did things that children would do, such as not finishing our meals, we would get beat. And it wouldn't just be like a regular spank on the butt. It would be like slap in the face, grab us by the scalp of our hair, dragging us across the floor. These were horrible things. They're traumatic. And my oldest brother, actually, before he passed away, he was struggling with addiction. And he had self-medicated for so long. I think he had a lot of childhood trauma that he was trying to run from. The early, love and bonding connection that he didn't have. And then my middle brother had a gambling addiction. And, mental health is just not talked about enough in our community.
Well, this runs really deep, and it manifests itself in a lot of different ways in each generation. And the thing that I always find is so hard to untangle, particularly, in the news we cover stories all the time of someone who did something horrific. And you always might wonder, how did this person become who they became?
Right.
And part of you gets torn when you think of, well, this person was a child once too. And this person experienced something clearly that was short of loving care. And maybe that's what led to this. And it doesn't excuse what happens, but untangling that has got to be so emotional when you just hear a story, let alone for it to be your family and your father, and trying to see your father as a little boy and accept what he went through without feeling like you're forced to forgive the things that also were abusive to you.
That's
a
huge theme.
Difficult. And that's why it takes experts
Yes.
in therapy.
Yes.
And lots of it.
And she took it upon herself to get the help. But she talks about mental health, not just for herself, but her whole family. Her brothers, when they were alive, she talks about, one of them went through addiction. They were all abused. And her mother was not necessarily trying to excuse her father. But you have a man here who's not going to talk about his own experiences. And they were significant. I mean, you're talking about wartime trauma. Mm-hmm. What it must have been like to grow up in Vietnam at that time and lose your mother and horrible things. And not only that, someone who never got the help, didn't even know how to begin to ask for it.
And probably did not occur to him.
No.
Because I know even when I think to my parents' generation. My parents are about 80. And you think about mental health and that sort of thing. I mean, my dad was kind of war era age. He didn't go to Vietnam, but a lot of his friends did. And that was just not an era where people actively sought out mental health care or coming back from war. And then you think all the previous wars, World War I, World War II, and the things these people came back with and carried with them and didn't address. And I feel like it's just now, maybe, starting to become something that people are open to. But those older generations, how hard to sit with that and just feel like you can't talk about it and you're just going to accept it for as it is.
Yes. And it's not all self-contained because it comes out, right, to his daughter, his children, how he treated them, what he was like. One unique thing when we talk about what happened in Emma's family is that he knew enough to stop because it ended with her and her brothers. How he treated his grandchildren, 180, completely different. And, the man that he is in his 60s, not who he was in his 20s and 30s. It's hard to, I asked Emma about what it was like to reconcile the two versions of her father that she was seeing and how hard that was. She knew she couldn't move further. She could not get over, I'm using air quotes, get over this on her own. And she decided, I need help.
So my first step was realizing that the parents that parented me in their 30s and parented my brothers in their 20s, fresh refugees in America, it's not the same parents in front of me right now in their late 60s. And so that was a graceful moment of thinking. But even though I thought like that, I couldn't help but realize and recognize that my heart rate was still increasing. I'm still sweating. I'm having hot flashes. And all of this fight or flight, this survival mode that came back to me from my childhood was there right now with me in my 30s. So that was almost like, okay, I'm safe right now. My parents are not the same parents that did that to me anymore. But why do I still feel like there's a bear in the room and I have to run from this bear? That was my realization that I had swept under the rug all the things that happened to me, to us, my siblings and I, all these years, and I never really faced it. I kept on making good grades to protect myself, going to college, being kind of like the model Asian daughter, pretty much. And if I make good grades, have a good degree, have a good career, my parents can't touch me. Well, guess what? I graduated and I did everything that I thought that I was supposed to. But inside, I still felt like I had a lot of issues with what happened to me, not only as a child, but also with losing my brothers. I think all those memories just came flooding back to me when my brothers died. Because what you really focus on when you lose a sibling are the childhood memories.
When she talks about how she started to have the physical manifestations of, even though mentally she tried to put it away, tried to sweep it under the rug in her own words, because she's busy. She's a mom. She's got a job, She's trying to juggle all of these things, and her body wouldn't let her sweep it under the rug. Physically would not let her.
There's a reason why they say the body keeps the score. Your body keeps the score. I think this goes back a little bit to some of what I talked to Mandy about in a previous episode, was that if you do not address trauma, if you do not address the grief, it will be in your body still and physiologically will manifest itself. You, in your mind, might think, I'm just going to put it away, but your body will respond. And until you address it, your body's going to keep the score of holding on to that trauma, holding on to that grief. And that's just a physiological thing. It is,
right.
It is separate from someone's willpower to push something away.
And it's so interesting to go back to what you're saying. In our conversation with Mandy, it would be, if Mandy and Emma came together and had a conversation, that would be a really interesting learning experience. Talking about how grief, it's not just about sadness. Losing her brothers, incredible amount of pain and sadness, but it brought forth a rush of emotion that had nothing to do with their deaths, but her childhood. Their childhood, that led to this conversation, and it was so overwhelming, she says.
I have a friend who, it was a different type of situation, but she describes as when she was a child, her father was a little more absent, but since she grew up and had kids of her own. And she described to me, and it's the first time that I think someone has opened up to me about this exact type of thing, but it's just what you're talking about of seeing the grandparent, your father, now playing and being so engaged with the grandchildren. And yet there's that little part of you inside, but being like, where was that? Where was that for me? And here she is. She's a grown, successful lady. And it is just part of the evolution that I think she has accepted that her part of her family has changed. And now he is more engaged. And that must be so hard to come to terms with, of being like, well, why wasn't I? This is how I would feel. I'm just speaking on my behalf. I would say, well, was I not special enough to receive that love and care? Was I not good enough? Did I not do the right things to allow you to love me like you love them?
Yeah.
That's how I think how I would feel. And that must just be that's painful.
Listen, if you're an adult now, you have your own experience that you can relate in a little bit. On different ends of the spectrum, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think about how we grew up, and my sister and I, we were classic latchkey kids. Parents had to work all the time. You know, I wanted to wear, gosh, what was that? Was it brownies when you were a little girl with a little sash?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So many girls in my first, second grade had that, and I wanted that.
Wanted to be a
what
brownie.
is that? How does one get to be a brownie? Like, you know, my parents could barely speak English, much less read English,
or sign up, to have the wherewithal that it's a group that exists in this neighborhood that you sign up for. And
for me, it was having that experience and understanding as an adult now what it was like for them. And so now I'm super engaged with mine because I want to give them what I didn't have. I'm not saying that we all grow up holding these things against our parents. It's more of the empathy. For me, anyways, it's deeply personal for everybody. For me, it's having that light bulb go on. Like, oh, I have a job now. My husband works now. We have kids now. I get it.
And also the responsibility of knowing, with how much we talk about mental health now and all the content out there available on parenting and trauma and early childhood development, we have so much information available now to know that information is available, and it is our responsibility to pick it up and incorporate it and do what it sounds like Emma's doing, of taking the steps to address that generational trauma and try to have it end with her.
You know, along those lines, Kelly, she went and saw a therapist. She was very proactive. I just want to point out, she's extremely proactive about trying to get the help for herself.
You go, Emma.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the first step that we talk about. Mm-hmm. She tried different therapists and realized that it wasn't quite working for her. And so she ended up finding what's called an inner child healer. It's specifically a form of therapy that deals with when she says, my inner child came out and was like, those baskets, in her words, weren't filled for me when I was a kid. And this person was not in the United States. She found them in the UK. And she took the first step in trying to come to terms with this.
So during my inner child workshop session, actually, there's one of the activities that kind of helped me tap back in to my dad's history. It's the third session. There's only 3 sessions in the workshop. It says, write a fairy tale about your life. Anything about the perfect life that you wish you would have had as a child, and fill in the gaps, make it as magical as you want. And, you could talk about like fairies, unicorns, anyone to come rescue you, use your imagination. And all I wanted was a grandma. I had no grandparents in America. So whenever I started writing, I wrote, if I had a grandmother. And then in my mind, I imagined that my dad's mother never died. And I'm like, if she had survived, she would have been the one who loved on my dad and cared for my dad. This whole chain reaction of intergenerational trauma that was passed down to us would have probably never happened. And then from there, it brought me back to, if my grandmother never died and she would have came to America with us and taken care of us, then my dad wouldn't have done all of that to us physically. And then from there, I backtracked and I thought about my dad would have never gotten beaten by his grandparents. He would have never gotten beaten by his step-parents. He would have got an education. My dad's illiterate. He can't read or write in Vietnamese. And then he would have parented us different. Or he may have never even met my mom and we would have never existed. So it put me in a space where, okay, so yeah, all these things that happened to me was wrong. Of course, it's abuse. But my dad went through it too. And he had no resources come to America. Mental health is definitely not talked about in our culture. And, Vietnamese were just new to the country then. There was no Vietnamese therapist, psychiatrist, none of that. So Dad did the best he could with what he had, with what he knew. And that was like an aha moment for me. I was like, oh my gosh. I knew all of the stories my entire life, but I finally forgave him. Forgiveness was never about the other person. It's not to make my mom and dad's life easier. It was always about me carrying this, this pocket full of stones my entire life. And now I'm deciding to, hey, let's put this giant stone down because it's too heavy now. I don't want to carry it for the rest of my life.
There are a couple things that come to mind of how, like, the evolution of coming to that realization of all these things that all led to it, and where does it even start? Because everything you can trace back probably one step behind and one step behind that. And recognizing these were all, kind of like downstream effects, if you will. And her being so evolved to accept that and kind of reframe the situation to be able to give her dad a little bit of grace in that moment without saying it's okay.
The understanding, the empathy, sympathy. And I do want to point out this is not possible for a lot of people, and we understand that. Emma certainly understands that as well, that the reality of surviving child abuse may not look like your parents moving in with you and helping raise your children. That's pretty unique. But the extraordinary takeaway for me from hearing her story was just the sheer amount of grace and empathy. Mm-hmm. And she needed to allow that. She needed to give that to herself first and then understand where her father came from and then jump back to current reality now and accept the love that her father is showing to her children, even though her inner child never got an ounce of that.
So she describes this stone in her pocket, and she decides to lay it down. Does she feel better? Does she say after that she felt lighter?
Yes, because now she can embrace her father in his new role as loving grandfather without going back, without that, the hot flashes that she talks about, the physical pulling down of, remember me, childhood you, what happened?
At Overlake Medical Center and Clinics, we offer the full spectrum of care for every stage of life. And with our skilled and compassionate physicians and care teams, it's so much more than a place to get better. It's where you can achieve a lifetime of good health. Welcome to Overlake, where your care is our passion. For more information, visit overlakehospital.org.
One thing I really admire about you, Kelly, is that you talk to your kids. That's not something the older generation, I think, did so much. What's that saying? Spoken to. I'm not good with the idioms.
Don't speak unless you're spoken to.
There's something, yes,
something like that.
So, yes, okay, you do. But there is that how kids were raised. Mm-hmm. I'll give you one example from myself. When I was growing up, my parents never said please and thank you to me. It was just go get that, do this, do that. That's just the way it was. Mm-hmm. Do you know how many times I say please and thank you to my boys?
A lot? Question mark?
I know.
Yes, a lot.
Can you put the dishes away, please? Like, please. Mm-hmm. Like every now and then I still chuckle at myself watching myself say this to an 8-year-old because no adult would say that to an 8-year-old back in the day. You do as you're told.
Mm-hmm. And this comes back to, it's my mom who said, you guys have so much more parenting information at your fingertips. I mean, I look at Instagram and the people I follow, all these intensive
child psychologist parenting,
gentle parenting, all these things. And I had a couple examples that I was telling to my mom of what to do if my middle child's having a meltdown or something. And she's like, gosh, you just have so much more information at your fingertips of how to do this parenting thing. And maybe we do.
Yeah.
But it also comes down to seeking it out. Just like for Emma, it came down to seeking out help because it's very easy to just go one day at a time and let it wash over you and just continue. But to be proactive, like Emma did here, I think that's very admirable.
That was the big hard turn for her and what she decided to do when she was starting to go through that. But to go back to engaging with your kids, all of this self-growth, personal development, it wasn't just contained within her. It was coming out as in the form of her own parenting, in the form of how she's engaging with her own kids. And here's an example of that.
I still have a lot of things that I need to work on. Yeah, so I'm not perfect. I do get impatient, and I do catch myself reacting to my kids in a way that I'm not proud of. I do not physically, hit my kids, but then my patience can sometimes become short. I am very lucky that I have a daughter that is very articulate. So whenever I do get snappy, she goes, "Mommy, I was just trying to have a normal family conversation and you yelled at me." I'm like, "You're right. I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh." So she really checks me. She checks me, puts me in my place, and I tell her, "Mommy, sorry. Mommy's learning how to talk to you because no one ever gave Mommy the patience and talk to Mommy in a certain way. So now Mommy is learning just like you, okay?" And she goes, "It's okay, Mommy. I'll wait for you to learn."
I'll wait for you to learn. Cry. I mean, just tears, right? It's just like you're either going to laugh, cry, or cry because of the sweetness of it.
Oh, that's so lovely. I, clearly have found patience to be in low supply, just with trying to stay on top of everything in these initial throes of losing Michael. But I liked it. My daughter one time, when I was frustrated, I'm kind of putting my shoulders up to my ears with my hands out, and I'm like, why? And then when I held my hands out, they weren't soft hands. They were kind of creating this, I don't know how you describe this, but almost like a witch hand, right?
Claw-ish?
Kind of claw-ish. Yeah, like, what do I need to do? And she looked at me and she said, "Mommy, why are you making scary hands?"
Oh.
And I was like, okay, you're right. Why am I making scary hands? And that's when you have to look at yourself and realize I'm frustrated, and frustration is not going to help in this case. And so, similar to what you said, and thanks to all my Instagram parenting accounts, I say, "I'm sorry. Mommy's frustrated right now. I will think about that, but thank you for telling me because that didn't make you feel good." And she said, "Yes, Mommy." And a few days later, she was doing something else and she had some meltdown over something, and I held it together quite well, I think, in my opinion, for that meltdown. And then afterward, you know what? She came up to me and she says, "Mommy, I'm sorry I got frustrated."
What?
And I said, "It's okay. We all get frustrated." But it validated in that moment that when I lose my cool, and if I can respond in saying, "I'm learning too," just kind of like what Emma was saying, they will pick up on that, even when you don't think they will. At least Riley did in this moment. And then she said, "I'm sorry I got frustrated." That's okay, baby girl. It happens.
When did kids learn to talk like this?
Was it
Right?
always there?
No,
And
I don't think it was always
was
there.
it always there and we didn't know to ask? Or we weren't asking, or the previous generations weren't saying, "I'm sorry, you're right," and validating their experience.
Well, if the previous generation, and I'm speaking for myself only,
Yeah.
if they're not going to even say please and thank you to a child, they're certainly not going to tell you
To apologize.
I'm learning too.
And apologize for my scary hands.
Apologize. No. When did this shift happen? I don't know if it's, the world evolves, society evolves, cultures evolve. We're learning to,
Yeah.
a few episodes we talked about naming the thing. Mm-hmm. I think that was it Mandy?
Yeah.
Or,
If you name it, you can tame it.
yes.
Again.
That whole, yes.
With the signs you can put in your living room.
They're getting better at naming, I mean young kids and adults, getting better at naming the emotions, I guess. When you have a meltdown, right, feel rage, we call it frustration. I am frustrated.
Mm-hmm. I'm having a hard time.
I'm having a bad phrase.
I'm having a hard time. I have used that a lot over the last 2 months of saying, "Guys, I'm having a hard time. I'm really trying here." And then I just hope that they respond. And my middle, River, he's responded to.
Even River.
In that it's a little bit different, but sometimes he'll come up and then it might be 20 minutes later, but he'll be like, "I sorry, mommy.
Oh,
I sorry, mommy." And I'm like,
melt
I know.
into a pile of tears.
But I think it's giving them the opportunity and acknowledging them as beings with brains, with opinions, and granting them permission to express it. Because when they're grown-ups, that's what I want them to do.
Sure.
And if I don't let them do that now, how are they going to know to do that later?
And to be clear, I'm not saying a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old has the emotional development or wherewithal to start talking about, this is, Mommy, I feel frustrated. A lot of it, I'm sure, is mimicking behavior because you are doing it and showing it.
You
and
have to model it.
Modeling it, yeah. So they model what they see.
But for Emma to break out of that cycle
Huge.
and to have her kids see how she's handling it, that's giving them the tools to do it, for Emma's grandkids.
I did ask her how her parents are doing today. They are all living together. Her parents live with her and her husband and help care for the boys. Here's what she said.
I think right now my parents have softened with age, softened with grief. They lost 2 sons, and they have let go of a lot of control that they used to think was important. Like, my mom used to always try to tell us what to do, even like as we're adults, but now she respects that we are her children, but we're grown now. And I think it's kind of funny now when we bring things up from the past. We have a better relationship. I definitely think that, I hate that my brothers aren't here to see this, and I hate that they both passed away. I still have one more brother. I have a 3rd brother that lives in Florida. But this is the best I've ever been mentally, and the best relationship I've had with my parents my entire life. And I'm 35 years old now. So I tell people all the time, like, they're like, how's you and your mom? Like, she just started liking me last week. So we're working on it.
I'm glad to hear that.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, to hear her laugh. And you have to have done the work, really hard work, to get to a place where you can talk about the past with your parents and be thankful for the relationship that you have today. I'm in awe of the work that she's put in.
And so for people out there who find themselves also wanting to do this kind of work on themselves, or if something physiologically is happening to them listening to this episode, there are tools out there. I didn't know about the
inner child healing.
type workshop. And again, not a lot of people have resources necessarily to fly to the UK, but exploring what kind of resources might be available, finding trusted people you can talk to, probably a good step.
The UK, she did it through, I think it was online.
Oh, okay.
She didn't have to go there. It was online, which was a huge help. Also, though, the fact that we have all this online, it opens doors that just didn't exist even 10 years ago. But it truly made a difference for her. She said, she had this childhood, from 0 to 18, traditionally speaking. But now she's got the rest of her life with her parents. And her parents are not who they were when they were in their 20s and 30s. And so she's so grateful for that.
For the change she's made for herself, but beyond that, for her kids, for her grandkids who don't even exist yet, all the way down the line. She's not just fixing herself or her immediate children and her relationship with her parents. It changes the whole trajectory of things. And I hope that she takes a lot of comfort and yes, and some pride in that she's changing the narrative.
And that removing the stones from her own pocket, how it wasn't about her parents, it was about her. But yeah, single-handedly stopping this from going any further.
Well done, Emma.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible. If anyone is listening and they can relate to any of this, whether it's the grief portion, a traumatic childhood, generational trauma, Emma has some advice for you.
My advice would be, anytime you feel that pain that's in your chest, write it down and put it outside of your body. I feel like as humans, we're meant to be expressive creatures. We're meant to create. We're meant to put things outside of our body when we feel things. Some of the greatest artists in the world, writers, painters, sculptors, and everything, created the most beautiful things when they're hurting the most and traumatized and suffering tragedy. And when that happens to you, make sure you don't leave it inside of you. Move, get up and dance, do some yoga, journal. I think journal sounds really corny to certain people who never do it. But me writing that fairy tale in that moment that I never thought would lead me back to forgiving my dad was pivotal for me. Find a way to express it outside of your body.
It is not easy, but it is possible. is Emma's message.
One thing that has been really helpful for me, the idea of journaling seemed daunting because to take a pen to paper and write down your feelings felt like it took a lot of time that I felt like I didn't have. One thing that has been helpful for me is to dictate it.
Oh.
And to dictate your journal each night or each moment where something strikes you, your phone allows you to dictate it. And if you use an iPhone, they have a journal app that allows you to dictate in, and then you can attach pictures if you'd like to associate. But I have found that it used to feel daunting to try and write down all that, but when I could dictate it, it was much easier for me. And if that is helpful to someone, if writing it down sounds a little bit daunting, that was helpful for me.
That's so brilliant. And also because when you have those feelings that want to come out, that want to verbalize, it's not going to be 8:30 at night when the kids are in bed and it's a magical hour where you have a full hour and you're not tired. Sometimes it might be while you're driving and this thing comes into your head and you've got to release it, dictating. I did not know that.
And if you don't dictate it into the journal, another thing that I have done, again, everyone's different and you don't have to do what I did, but in the notes section, if something strikes me in a moment, I just jot down a couple of words or a sentence that will remind me of it. And then I've just got a long list of things that when I am ready to eventually dictate a journal entry, I've got my bullet points there so I'm not forgetting some of the key things that I wanted to kind of get out.
I do love the notes. The Notes app. It's one of my favorite apps.
It seems like a random jumble of things very often.
Yes.
But there's good stuff in there.
I like recording. But when I use notes, I do type. Kel, I don't use the dictate. I should use that.
Dictate.
I know. That is so modern times.
Time saver.
I know. But to go back to what you're saying, though, I don't like when I open it to see what I've got in there. It is a jumbled stream of consciousness.
I've got
she's pulled out her phone.
I've got to-do lists
mixed in with
with parks that I need to go to, Christmas gifts the kids want.
It's
all kinds of stuff.
It's like the junk drawer equivalent of apps.
Thank you. That is exactly what it is.
And it's important. We all need that.
There's never
drawer.
any tape. You always need tape, and it's never in the junk drawer.
Batteries for me. It was a hard episode, Kelly, today, and I want to thank Emma for sharing her deeply personal experience with us.
Yes, Emma, thank you.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And thanks for sharing your experiences with us today, too.
And thank you, too. Hard Turn is a Sinclair podcast produced out of KOMO TV in Seattle, Washington. We're your hosts, Kelly Koopmans
and Mary Naum. Our show is produced and edited by Jordan Rizzieri and Brian Petrus, with engineering support from Adam Bronstein, Bill Thesh, and John Reynolds. Production support from Eric Newell.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode and to stay up to date on future episodes, follow us on Instagram at Hard Turn Podcast and on X at Hard Turn Pod.
You can follow Hard Turn on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know someone making a big change in their life? Share this week's episode. Your recommendation helps our show grow. So spread the word.
My watch is off. God, my back is killing me.
Oh, gosh.
I know.
She's falling apart, folks.
Hard Turn was presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.